Alrighty, mic check. That seems to work. Welcome to Stealing from Thieves, analyzing and attacking the modern piracy Homelab stack. Today we're going to kind of talk about the history of the Homelab, stealing content like movies and TV shows online, and then dive in on a vulnerability we found in a specific stack and talk that through and show you guys some cool stats that we collected as a result. Quick introductions. I'm Nicholas Anastasi, based in Madison, Wisconsin. Penetration testing background, also do some vulnerability research and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you're so much taller than me, sorry. JP, same thing, hacker, based out of Milwaukee. Been doing this for like 4-ish years now, mostly just breaking things, and apparently that gets to be a job, so.
If anybody doesn't know, those cities are in Wisconsin, so failed to mention that. Quick about me slide. We opted to do some collages this year of things we like. So I hope somebody recognizes something up here, which would be pretty cool. And then I'll kick it to JP's as well, real quick.
Yeah, it has a little bit more going on, sorry, but yeah, we could sit here for 2 minutes and watch that whole movie if we really wanted to, but we only have 15 minutes, so.
All right, sweet. So before I dive in here, I want to gauge the crowd. Who's used Pirate Bay, stolen a movie online, that sort of thing before? It's not being filmed, so you can,
space.
yeah, it's safe space. Yeah. I have
Movies.com.
Yeah. I have this memory of being a kid at my grandparents' house, and my uncle was over there, and he pulled out his laptop. He had like a 2G modem on it, and he said, "I got to show you a cool website," and pulled open the Pirate Bay, and showed me that, and from then on, my parents got cease and desist letters in the mail until I figured out how to do it right. So brief background on media piracy in general. I'm sure everybody's familiar with you shouldn't download a car memes and things like that. But 1991, 2001, peer-to-peer file sharing really kind of kicked off. Napster was around, things like that, and torrents got very popular as a way of downloading content. From there, right, Pirate Bay went live. It wasn't really different from some of the other services or solutions out there, but it made the process of stealing a movie very easy. You could go search for a movie, download it, load it up in your torrent client, and you'd get that movie. Shortly afterwards, the big crackdown on piracy began. ISPs really automated the process of sending you cease and desist letters and things like that. So it was, you could download something, it'd be a couple days before you got something in the mail or an email, something like that, and it was easy to get caught. From there, I'll kick it to JP.
Yep. So right around 2009 to 2011, things like Sickbeard and Couch Potato showed up. These really pushed Usenet as a safer alternative way to download media instead of using torrents. And along with this was a big shift to more automated setups. Before, you would have to manually look up the media that you wanted to download it, and then hope that it actually completed. Around this time, Sickbeard and Couch Potato kind of pushed automated, set up once and forget it setup, so that you could just set it up once, and then once you specify, like, I want to watch all 4 seasons of the show, it would automatically pull down every single episode and whatever specific quality profile you wanted it to be. Then 2012, we got hosted file sites like Mega Upload. With this, you wouldn't need a torrent client. You could just go to the site, download your media directly with the click of a button, but then the FBI sees them. So after that, every other site like it began to implement restrictions to avoid a similar fate. So that pushed people that were doing this back towards decentralized methods and self-hosting applications. Then in 2013, the R era here, applications like NZP Drone changed their name to Sonar, which was it was a contest to change the name, actually. Sonar was used for downloading shows, and then we got apps like Radar and LiDAR for movies and music. These applications really helped push automated pipelines as the default standard for the piracy scene. You simply search your media, and then the rest is done for you. And then now with Docker and Docker Compose, deployment is super trivial. Creating a piracy home lab couldn't be easier. You set up the R stack, you get a media player like Plex or Jellyfin, and then you have a whole home theater set up to watch your content that you attained. And then on top of that, you don't really need a crazy setup to host this. You could honestly just use a Raspberry Pi and any decent amount of storage for your movies or shows. So let's actually take a closer look at what that stack looks like. So again, starting with the hardware, like we said before, super lightweight. You could honestly use a Raspberry Pi and any type of attached storage. I have allegedly have a B-Link mini PC with like 20 terabytes just plugged into it, and then
Yeah, my setup's kind of ridiculous. I have a Synology with like 15 terabytes of storage or something like that, Proxmox for application hosting, and all of it's in Docker. So pretty similar to JP.
you don't need to do that. You could just use like a flash drive and a Raspberry Pi, honestly. But yeah, so like we said before, Docker has made all of this super trivial and easy. Inside of that, we have a couple applications, starting with the R family, what we were talking about, and also the family of software that we're going to be digging into about the vulnerability that we discussed. In order from left to right, top down, we have Sonar for shows, Radar for movies, LiDAR for music, and Redar for books. These all handle monitoring for new requests and new media to keep everything organized for the rest of the apps in the Homelab to interact with. And one thing to note is that they're all interactable with an API and it's scriptable, so it's super easy for people who like having automated setups in their Homelab, and it also makes things really easy for attackers if you can compromise them. Next, we have download clients. So clients like NZBGet for Usenet or Torrent for Torrent. These are what actually receive the jobs and from the Servarr stack to pull down the content. These clients receive jobs from those R apps, and they'll do all the heavy lifting. And then we have the media servers. Real quick, who here uses Plex? Okay, it's a lot more than the last time. Does anyone here use Jellyfin? Okay, so yeah, Plex is closed source and it is paid. I bought like a lifetime license a while ago, so I don't really care about that anymore. But Jellyfin is open source, and it seems like it's a lot more popular with you guys, so cool. These are just kind of like the Netflix part of the stack where you can browse your media, you can pick what you want to watch, and then watch it directly there. These are apps that you can have either on your TV or your phone or anywhere really, so yeah, it doesn't matter. And both of these integrate automatically with the R stack, so super useful. And then for the others, there's just some other moving parts that you can add to your Homelab but aren't really applicable here. But Home Assistant for home automation, Dashy for like a little central dashboard, and like millions others. What's that site called where you can?
Yeah, there's a GitHub repo called Awesome Self-Hosted, and it's a giant curated list of all these apps you can host at your house. I waste hours every weekend trying them out and things like that. But
All right, so let's talk about the actual average Servarr stack here. So at the center of everything, we have the Servarr application, in this case, Radar for movies. Radar is the primary movie orchestration app. So the user, when they want to watch something or obtain a new movie, they can either go to Radar or go through a request portal like Overseer. This is what Overseer looks like. This is for if you have, like family members or spouses that like to watch something, but you don't want to explain to them how to do everything. This just makes it super friendly, and in the web UI, they can go here instead. So here we have the awful movie source code. It's really bad. You shouldn't watch it, but
I love it.
it's really bad. Let's say you want to watch it for whatever reason. All you have to do is look it up, and then you hit the request button. You specify what quality you want it to be at. You can either watch it at 480p or maybe specify it at 4K if you want it to take up 20 gigabytes in your Homelab for no reason. But once you hit request, Overseer is going to reference a database of movies, either the IMDb or there's a couple different other ones that you can use. So that's how we'll actually look for it and identify it specifically to that. Then all of that information is going to get sent over to Radar. So Radar hears you want to watch source code for some reason, and then it's going to pull down the metadata, the quality profile that you specified, the movie ID, and then it's going to start processing and looking for that matching release. So back to the stack. Again, they went through Overseer, talking to Radar, and then to do that, for Radar to find the movie, it's going to start talking to indexers. Indexers can be stored in a tool called Prowler. It's just an indexer manager. We'll cover indexers more in like 2 seconds, but basically they're the tool that we're going to use to search for content available via Usenet or Torrent sometimes. So Prowler is going to host all of the API keys we need to actually interact with the indexers. And then here, this is the list of the results for the requests that are received in Radar. So these are all the different options for watching the movie source code. Some of these are like 2 gigabytes, some are 15 gigabytes. It's going to filter based off of what you asked for. And then, yeah, like I mentioned before, this is going to use indexers and Usenet, but we're going to take a step back and kind of explain those because I think a lot of people out here probably already know about this, but I definitely didn't until we started like digging into the piracy Homelab, but I'll kick it back to Nicholas.
Alrighty, ready for my boring diagram? I'm a huge, I started with torrents, and so I just grabbed something off Pirate Bay and download it and load it up into my torrent client, let it grab content, like I was talking about earlier, getting cease and desist letters and things like that from your ISP get annoying pretty quick. Torrents are also dependent on some other things that make them difficult to actually leverage in practice for consistent media piracy. And so what I'm kind of showing up here is the idea of using Usenet as a download mechanism for media. Who's used Usenet for text boards and things like that one day? All right, I am 30, so I never did. So if I'm explaining something to I'm sure I'll cover not new ground for some people. So in the early 90s, right, when you wanted to update an application on your machine, say you had SET or awk or something like that, you either had to go to a local meetup and get a floppy disk, and then you could get that latest copy of that application, copy it over to your machine, or you could sign up for like mailing lists where you'd actually get mailed a floppy disk or a CD at one point maybe to actually get that file because it was too large and it was difficult to host on websites. And so what people figured out was it was really easy, or not really easy, but Usenet as a text board mechanism could be used to actually share files, but because this protocol didn't support very large files, let's say, you know, you had a 100 megabyte movie or something like that, or an application that was 20 megs or something along those lines, what you could do was actually split that file up into multiple chunks, encode it, post it on these text boards, and then as a user, I could go to the text board, I could grab each individual chunk, recombine it, and then actually get that application. And so that was really kind of earlier on, and people figured out at the same time it uses HTTPS or the NNTP protocol and can easily, you know, the same behavior for apps can be replicated for movies and TV shows and music and things like that. In the kind of, just as a high level overview here, right, they're modern Usenet providers, so they provide you access to the actual protocol, and they also host files for you, or they'll host those split chunks. And so some of the big ones I'm listing there, Equa, Giga News, News Hosting, those are paid providers to Usenet that you can leverage to actually get access to content if you want to pirate it via Usenet. And so quick kind of overview, this is, I'm not sure if anybody can even read it, but the Usenet ecosystem in itself today is really odd. There's resellers, there's giant backbones, right? The important part I'm showing off here is there's two sides to the coin, right? From a downloading perspective, it's easy for me to download content from Usenet, but also from a takedown perspective, because these are just small chunks of files being stored on a Usenet backbone, and they're even propagated across multiple providers. It's really hard for me to go to Equa or one of these providers and say, take down source code from your servers, because they go, well, we just have terabytes of chunks of files. We have no idea where it is. It's just this giant kind of storage array of things. From there, right, let's talk about real quick how you even upload content in that sense. So, right, at this point, we have a Usenet provider. They're storing files. If I want to publish a brand new movie to Usenet so other people can download it, I use a kind of methodology that was developed by Newsbin that early on, right, I had to hope I could grab each individual chunk reliably and reconstruct it. Newsbin invented the NZB file. It's really just an XML file that points at those individual chunks and tells me where I can grab them. So instead of doing like I gotta grab each file, reconstruct it myself, instead now kind of the methodology with a NZB file is to store direct links. And so all I need to have is a download client that goes and grabs those chunks and reconstructs them for me, just kind of an automation mechanism. To actually upload, I'm basically doing that chunking and then splitting it into multiple files and uploading it. NYUU is one of the popular applications for it. You feed it a movie, you have access to a Usenet provider, chunks it up into multiple bits, uploads it to the Usenet provider, and then theoretically it becomes available. From there, we have indexers. So there's kind of two players in this space. It's not necessarily with torrents where somebody rips a movie, they upload it, and then you have to count on seeders to pull it back and things like that. Indexers exist as simply a map to where these files are. So these, again, are paid providers. NZB Geek is probably the most popular one. If anybody is using this in practice, I would bet, or in this room, I would bet they're using NZB Geek. The other two are invite only. But all an indexer does is stores those NZB files that are created. You can grab them from there, kind of similar to Pirate Bay in a sense, and that NZB file stores the locations of those chunks. From a reliability standpoint, there are a ton of indexers that exist, but some are much more reliable than others. The reason I called out NZB Geek is they just win above everybody else. They're very, very consistent in their process. You can use multiple, just like you could use multiple Usenet providers, but in general, NZB Geek, allegedly, in my experience, is probably one of the best on the market, especially with pricing as well. And then finally, right, from a download client perspective, so JP talked about indexers. We're also going to talk about that download client that parses that NZB file. What you do as a user, you go into Radar, you request your movie, it goes to your indexer, it grabs the NZB file, it sends it over to your download client, and that download client actually parses the different locations of those file chunks, reconstructs them, and then in the end, you have a movie that you can view. So I'll kick it back to JP here.
There we go. Yeah. So like we said before, Radar talks to Prowler, which uses those indexers to actually get the NZB file for the movie you're looking for. And once a match is found, it's going to send that NZB file back to Radar, which kicks it over to the download client. So in this example, the download client is NZB get. Here we see it's downloading the movie source code, like a 4.12 gigabyte version of that movie.
We found this on Google Images, right?
Yeah, this is on Google Images, allegedly, by the way. But basically, NZB get is going to take that NZB file, which again is just an XML file containing the post IDs for all of the different chunks of that file. It's going to download the chunks in parallel, connecting to multiple Usenet providers for getting faster speeds. And then it's going to rebuild it, reassemble it, pack it up, and then drop it into a shared folder. And that shared folder is connected to also a picture on Google Images, someone's Plex server, and Radar is going to detect that the download is completed and let Plex know that they should refresh their library and tell the user that the movie's done. Then you can go on Plex and, watch this horrible movie. So from end to end, just kind of like showing the example, I think I can do the little laser pointer, right? Nice, there we go. So yeah, so user makes a request to the front end in Overseer. The Homelab is then going to search for the content, find a match, get that NZB file, download all of the chunks with NZB gets, import it over to your library, and then rebuild it, and now you can watch this movie. So once you set this up, ideally, this entire pipeline is fully automated, and you'll never have to mess with it again. I think we touched on this a little bit, but why didn't we talk about torrents?
All right, so torrents, I was really proud of this slide. I hope it's funny to somebody. So torrents are perfectly fine. There is one big downside to them in my mind today. So to download something over a peer-to-peer network, you have to count on somebody seeding that content to you. So somebody else has to be publishing, it's got to be making that file available. So as a torrent user, once I download it, I have to seed that content. Somebody else has to leverage that seeder to actually grab that content. And so if you want to watch something really obscure, something that's not new, Usenet backbones are going to have it. They'll hold on to files and chunks and things like that for years. I think some of them are offering 2,000 plus days of retention at this point. Whereas with torrents, you're kind of at the beck and call of, anybody out there on the internet. You can pay for access to private trackers and things like that, people who consistently seed content from a VPS in the Netherlands or something, but you're going to lose out probably pretty often. Whereas with Usenet, right, like it's going to be there. I've found some pretty obscure things on Usenet that you know, are not going to be available on torrents. In addition, like I talked about as well, torrent traffic is very easy to detect from an ISP layer. They don't go after individuals as aggressively as they used to, but it's still, right, very easy to spot the traffic, and so people have to resort to using VPNs like NordVPN, a known Fed honeypot, to download their client or content through. Whereas with Usenet, you can actually either operate over 563 TCP, the NNTP default port to download the content, or some of them support HTTPS. So from a observability layer, it is basically going to look like encrypted web traffic, like you're watching Netflix. Of course, they can see where the DNS requests are going and things, but you have a level of plausible deniability you don't have with torrents. Outside of that, right, torrents are also a little bit slower. When you want to grab a movie over a torrent, it's a crapshoot if you're going to get it in, you know, a day or an hour, 30 minutes, whatever. Usenet is extremely consistent. With multiple providers, you might be looking at, you know, minutes to grab a 4K movie or something like that, depending on your internet speed. So I'm going to hop over now to talk about the Servarr stack. Real quick here, I guess, who's familiar with the Servarr stack itself? Okay, cool. So let's see. Back in the day, NZB drone was created. That was the source of all these Servarr applications that JP picked on radar. Sonar was actually the first. And so what ended up happening was people wanted to watch with movies, right? You download a movie, you have it forever. You don't really want to watch for new movies. You can just grab it when you want to watch it. Whereas with TV shows, you don't want to have to go grab a TV show every time a new episode comes out. And so NZB Drone was created to kind of support that. You could put the TV show into NZB Drone, and every time a release happened based on TMDB, the TV show database, I'm not sure if I'm saying that acronym right, it would just go grab it, download it, and you'd have it in your, you know, on your file share or whatever it might be. JP, I can kick it back to you for a minute here if you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
There we go. So yeah, like you said, NZB Drone kind of turned into Sonar, and then from there, where are we? Yeah, so Radar got forked over, so Sonar, yeah, Radar got forked over to handle movies, and then from there, everyone kind of just cherry-picked changes from Sonar. So LiDAR and Bazar appeared, LiDAR's for music, and then Prowler and Radar got released, kind of expanding the ecosystem, and then Sonar got all of its code basically rewritten, and from there, what really should have happened here is they should have written like a library for everyone to kind of pull changes from and then be able to reference. But instead, whenever a change got pushed to Sonar, the people who were maintaining Radar and LiDAR and Radar just kind of manually looked at those changes and sort of cherry-picked them and added to it over time. So now that the Servarr stack is so popular and expansive, every time a change happens to Sonar, it slowly gets pushed out to all of it. And so, real quick, sorry. Here, so basically what we're saying here is that they all have a shared code base, and all of them are inheriting that code base from NZB Drone. And so Sonar is the upstream source, and so every fork kind of depends on the same core logic that Sonar started. You want to talk about the propagation model though?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, if you go look at the Sonar code base, about 70% of it is based on the original NZB Drone project. And so it's most of the front end code and everything is unique. Some of the apps are very different. Some of them aren't that different at all. For example, Radar, the book based one, is significantly different just because it has to reference APIs that are much more, I guess I'd say, obscure. It's probably why Radar is deprecated at this point and not being maintained. But, you know, if you find a vulnerability or an issue in NZB Drone itself, one, it's going to be present in all of these Servarr applications, but in addition, propagation of that change is really slow. I feel bad, and we'll talk about it a little bit more for the Sonar dev, because he's kind of leading a fleet of devs, but on GitHub, and these projects are open source, so it's a little difficult to maintain and keep track of this sort of thing. So I'll kick it back to JP.
Yeah. So taking a step back, let's talk about a specific setting on the Servarr apps called DFLA, or Disable for Local Addresses. On setup right now, when you first load up a Servarr app, it requires you to make a selection for authentication. You can choose between basic auth or a normal login page, and then you can choose to either always enforce authentication or disable it for local addresses. What that means is the app is going to force you to authenticate every single time, except if you're accessing it from your own home lab or with a local IP address. So this seems standard, the first part, not the disable for local addresses. That's super weird. But on a fresh install of a Servarr app, back in the day, there was absolutely no authentication. You'd load it up, and then you could just do whatever you wanted. And so typically these apps were meant just to be on your home lab, so that's not really that big of a deal. But then people, following YouTube tutorials, not really understanding what they're doing, start putting them on the internet, which is always a great idea. So if you wanted to put auth behind them, also back in the day, you had to dig through the settings. It wasn't a easy way to do it. So this change only happened in the last 2 to 3 years, where setup prompts were introduced. Now you have to enable authentication before you can even access the application. So yeah, this used to be a much worse problem. Like we were saying before, you didn't have to enable authentication. So back in the day, there was just thousands of these apps with absolutely no protection on the internet. Anyone could just kind of log in. Allegedly, anyone could just log in and look at movies and shows and all of these different key settings here. But something I want to harp on is these are open source applications. So these developers are not doing it full time. They're dealing with this at maybe not the most security-minded people. So when users were complaining about authentication being forced onto the apps, DFLA was their middle ground here, a way for authentication to be enforced while also reducing friction for users that are just going to be accessing this from their home network. So like we said before, because the Servarr apps all share the same code downstream from Sonar, when DFLA got added to Sonar, it was then added to the rest of the family. And the problem here is it added basically a point of failure where if DFLA is the only thing protecting your app from someone accessing it anonymously, then again, it's the only thing that's stopping someone from accessing the admin panel is if the app can correctly identify the source IP address. So if you can find a way to spoof your source IP address, you basically get to bypass authentication. And so here we have a standard radar instance. The usual authentication flow when you log in works like this. I'm going to pause this video real quick. Right there. Okay. So the usual authentication flow works like this. You hit the login page, you enter your creds, and if they're valid, the browser then redirects you to an endpoint called initialize.json. Here in our demo, we're trying to hit initialize.json with nothing else, and then we obviously don't get anything. Rightly so, because we didn't pass in any credentials. However, this instance has DFLA enabled, so we need a way to trick it into thinking we're coming from a local or RFC 1918 address. One way we can do this is with the X forwarded for header. Some applications will expect this header and read it to determine the originating IP address of a request, especially if the app expects the client to connect through a web proxy. So by adding this header here and setting it to a local address, the app now thinks we're coming from local, and it'll return this entire response here, which includes the root API key for definitely not mine, which is why it's not redacted. But for some reason, this API key gives you basically admin access to every endpoint on Radar. So if you've done web app pen testing, initialize.json as a whole just kind of is a big red flag. So let's actually dive into what's happening here.
All right, so
First, does anyone recognize what movie this is from?
Okay.
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 All right. Better than the last one.
I'll take an aside here. I put Nirvana the band the show in the first my collage slide, which is a show full of movie and TV show references, and I love content like that. So this is an amazing talk because I liked writing it, but also because I love sticking references and stuff, and this is perfect. So like JP said, initialize.json is weird. I have never pen tested an app personally where I can hit an endpoint and it'll give me the admin API key. That's strange. The reason it exists is because they had to add an auth to this thing, but they didn't want to write a full suite of authentication and authorization and RBAC and things like that into the app. They had to keep it simple. One, because They just don't have the time to maintain that, and it can introduce complexity that then introduces vulnerabilities. But then in addition, with all of these forked applications, the developer, I guess, knowledge on things changes depending on who's working on each individual app. And because API endpoints and things like that can differ between them. And so initialize.json not only gives you the admin API key, that basically, if you look at the request flow, gets passed into a header that serves as your authentication header for the rest of the app. But in addition, tells you the version of the API in use and things like that. This file is not a JSON file that sits on disk when you first install the app, but instead is dynamically generated every time you load the app for the first time. And so even, right, if we had this vulnerability, somebody rotated their API key, we would just get a new updated admin version of it. And so I understand why they did it this way, but it's not obviously the best way to do it. It's better than being able to navigate to a settings page and just yank the key in plain text off the page, but still a little bit scary. So now I got stuck with the boring slides a little bit. We're going to look at some code. So if you start digging through the actual NZB drone code base, you're going to find this class function, whatever, here. The whole app is written in .NET. Basically, what is going on here is they had to add support for reverse proxies. So in my Homelab, I use traffic to actually serve SSL certs and things like that to all of my Homelab apps, just so I don't have SSL warnings every time I access them and things like that. But apps need to be semi-aware of where the request is coming from. And because of, they had to handle these being on the internet, I guess, basically. And so what this does here is parses in the contents of the X forwarded for header, the proto and port. That stuff doesn't matter to us too much. And then it clears all known networks and basically trusts it as the source IP to handle that reverse proxy stuff. From there, if we look at the actual middleware pipeline or code that references that block of code that we were just looking at, this is a short 13-line set of code that is part of a file that has thousands of lines in it, so I just kind of condensed it. But we'll see in line 1 that we pull in the value of that use forwarded for headers function, and then later on we're going to call use authentication, use authorization, things like that to actually determine if we're coming from a local address or not. The final kind of piece to the puzzle that gets dropped in here, right, is we're going to parse the client IP. We get the client IP from that forwarded for header if it wasn't passed directly through that inbound request. And then if it's a local RFC 1918 IP, it's going to be trusted and you'll get auth. So again, I understand why they built it this way, but they're trusting that header blindly. If anybody's interested in this kind of vulnerability class, James Kettle did a talk about it at DEF CON maybe, say, like 4 or 5 years ago now, where he kind of popularized the technique. This is a little different than some of the scenarios he was talking about, but still kind of the same underlying issue where developers have to account for reverse proxies, but can't do it very easily in a lot of ways, and then DFLA just complicates the process altogether. So, kick it to JP.
Yeah. What would you do if you had access to 8 petabytes of movies? I'll preface this by saying we did not steal anything. I want to make that very clear. The title of this talk is Stealing from Thieves, but there's a big invisible asterisk next to that title because we did not do that. But we did scan the internet just to kind of collect some stats and figure out how many of these are actually exposed on the internet. In terms of like why we did that, in our defense, this was too good of an opportunity to ignore after finding the bypass. Our goal here obviously wasn't theft, just kind of understanding the modern landscape and seeing what other people are doing, basically. We kind of wanted to see how many of these are actually exposed on the internet, how big are the libraries, what indexers are people using, what download clients are they using, Usenet versus Torrent. Obviously, we prefer Usenet, and spoiler for the stats later, Torrent still appears to be the most popular way. There's a bunch of different things we could have collected here, but this was kind of important to us because, again, 2-3 years ago, a lot of these were just exposed on the internet without login, and we kind of missed that window to do that. So this is the last chance to take a look at the ecosystem before making sure these apps are like actually secure and I will kind of spoiler alert say that this is now a patched vulnerability, but in terms of what we found a bunch of these are still on the internet exposed. Some are even still exposed without authentication, but we found like multi-petabyte sized libraries, and yeah, there's just a bunch of stuff here, but.
And I'll talk a little bit about this slide. So this is kind of the distribution of applications. If you look at how many stars they have on GitHub, this makes sense. Sonar and Radar are obviously the most popular. There's follow-up ones like Prowlar, Redar, LiDAR, and Wispar, which I will not talk about much today, but you can imagine. So the Radar and Sonar make a ton of sense. As for Prowlar, this one was a little odd to us, just simply because one, we didn't see a ton of people using torrents or Usenet in practice, but then in addition, Prowlar, I can't think of a reason it would need to be on the internet unless you were renting access to somebody. And so that's kind of a theory we have, but it seemed to be slightly more prevalent. We showed 12% twice there, but Prowlar beat it by a tiny bit. Exposure in general doesn't make much sense. I think it's really people think they need to access these apps from the internet so they can interact with them, but remotely. But in practice, you could just expose Overseer and maybe Plex or something like that to get the same effect. LiDAR makes a ton of sense. Spotify is probably the only media stream, Spotify, Apple Music, whatever. That ecosystem makes a lot of sense. Music artists don't get paid a ton for actually getting streams on it, but it's just too good to actually, I'd rather pay $15 a month to get shown music and be able to organize it and things like that. Whereas with Radar and Sonar that focus on TVs and TV shows and movies, right? I might be paying a ton of money monthly to actually watch all the content I want to watch across streaming services. So before we start talking about this sort of stuff, just to give you an idea how we pulled this data. So we scanned and found all of the Servarr instances on the internet, attempted to exploit the vulnerability in a very minimal way. So we grabbed that admin API key off the initialize.json endpoint and then leveraged that to hit the embedded API on all of these to pull stats on, what movies are present, what TV shows are present, how big is the library, that sort of thing. And then compiled all those stats and got the statistics that probably Netflix gets to look at for their users, but for pirates. And so these are the most popular movies that we found across Radar instances.
At the time we collected these stats.
Yes, yeah.
It's
a big caveat. I will say that Radar supports like automatic, or they have built-in lists where they'll just grab the latest movies. You can just click a button in the settings panel to do it. And so that makes sense here for the most part. Very happy to see Dune on here and a couple other movies, but it totally makes sense. I guess, JP, do you have any other notes on this one to mention?
Well, just the usual joke of there's some really good movies up here, and then there's also Deadpool and Wolverine. But,
yeah. Sorry to any fans. And then from a TV show perspective, these ones made a ton of sense to us as well. You will notice that there's no Netflix produced content up here on the screen. Take that for what you will. But still very kind of representative of what's popular out there in the world today.
So you guys were, just scanning like the list of
yes.
How big, and then just what the
Yep.
popular was.
Yep. So we'll talk about potential destructive actions that somebody could have taken, but the focus here was just on collecting statistics in general about what was in use, and as for, what's more popular, torrents versus Usenet, SAB-NZB is a popular Usenet client. Torrents still won. I'm guessing because it's free, and that's kind of the pure motivation. We did see quite often that people would have both set up, but primarily the Usenet users were paying for a Usenet provider, but then using free indexers. So I think it was sort of a fallback mechanism. If you couldn't get it via torrents, you would get it via Usenet and hope that one would land. But torrents won out. I hope that this talk, if anybody's using torrents for this, it will motivate you towards Usenet because it's much more reliable, like we talked about. But regardless, also from a download client perspective, torrents, right? QBitTorrent won out. There's pre-packaged, like very reliable QBitTorrent applications that come with Unraid and Synology and things like that. And the front end is a little bit more mature than you might see with Deluge or Transmission that are shown on the two cars down there. SAB NZB won out. JP and I are NZB Git users. Yeah, NZB Git is cool. It's written in, I believe, raw C or C++, and we did a ton of investigation on these apps as well to try to find vulnerabilities, and SAB NZB is built really well, and so is NZB Git. So they're really cool apps, yeah, and then real quick as well, to talk about trackers and indexers. Trackers are referring to torrents, indexers to Usenet indexers, right? NZB Geek won out as the most popular. You can buy lifetime subscriptions to NZB Geek, so I think people just do that and use it in perpetuity. The cool thing was Pirate Bay was still winning for a tracker, which I thought was pretty surprising, but still pretty cool. And then in general, right, there were sprinkled in other trackers and indexers and things like that. Dog NZB makes sense. Leet makes sense for some other things. But these are kind of boring stats. I think our favorite slide in the whole talk, I'll kick it over to JP for.
Yeah, so this is the whales, probably the thing I was most excited to look at. Who has the biggest media server? And so we're talking about like hundreds of terabytes worth of content. And again, these stats aren't how much storage they have, it's just how much storage is taken up by movies or shows. So yeah, our IT guy, Pete, I don't know if he's watching this, but he had someone trying to sell him a storage appliance for 1 petabyte, and it requires 2 20-amp outlets just to power. So I can't even imagine how disgusting these people's basements must be like. But starting with Radar, for the top 10 movies, or for the top 10 Homelabs we found, they made up about like 1.5 petabytes just on their own. And then number one user being a random guy in Jersey with 441 terabytes. Only his Radar was exposed. I imagine he's also using Sonar, and I can't even guess how big that library was. And I will say that we did notice their instance is no longer exposed online, so either they made the smart choice of taking this offline, or maybe they got by like a 3-letter agency. But for shows, the top 10 Homelabs combined to be about 1.3 petabytes, and with the number one guy being in the UK with 250 terabytes. One thing I'll note here is I definitely thought that like the shows libraries would be bigger than the movies just because of quantity, but we were later like kind of explained by a couple different people. It probably makes more sense because of the quality of the content. Movies are much more likely to be released in 4K and higher quality than shows. I just assumed like, you know, if your fiance accidentally downloads 800 gigabytes of Little House on the Prairie, it's going to take up your entire home lab. Sorry.
True story.
True story. Happened. Yeah. Oh yeah, go for it.
One too.
Yeah.
So, for the people here using Plex, I'm assuming you share it in some way, shape, or form with family and things like that and friends. The same thing happens with Radar and Sonar, and so these giant libraries are probably rented as Netflix-esque providers to people. They will literally download every new movie. You can request TV shows or something via a Discord bot. Like it's there's a whole other ecosystem that exists where you can pay $5 to $10 a month and then rent that Radar instance or your Plex instance out to people. There's full apps. There's one called Tatooine that will actually like track your Plex usage and things by multiple people. And so it's very popular. I will say in practice, it's a nightmare because if you give your dad access to your Plex and he can't get Gladiator 2, he's going to be really mad at you. So there's a lot of troubleshooting. This stuff, we made it seem like a well-oiled machine when you want to download something, but that's not true. In some cases, you have to go reset your queue and things like that. So there's a bit of manual work, but
one thing really quick just to talk about that. When we were complaining about torrents, yes, sometimes you can download something and it's not at all what you expect. You know, like back in the era of, you know, like law enforcement cracking down on people using LimeWire, they would purposely upload like malicious versions of files and you expect it to be something else. That still happens with Usenet. I was trying to watch Severance and instead I got like a Markiplier Let's Play for 2 hours. So that's still a problem. That doesn't like necessarily go away. But really quick, pillaging potential. So we can get that API key. Who cares? What can you actually do with that? Using the API key on like Radar or Sonar, you can hit those endpoints and it'll give you the name of your indexers, the name of the download clients, but everything that gets returned is redacted. You can't actually get the paid API keys for an indexer, or you can't get the password for the download client. So in real life, this feels more like an information disclosure, but we started digging into the API a little deeper and we found that there's actual multiple endpoints you can use to export databases, but you can only export a DB as a user from the local network. So super cool with the vulnerability that we found, we can leverage that along with the API key that you can obtain to pull down a DB manually. So here we're hitting the initialize.json endpoints, grabbing that admin API key, downloading a fresh backup using the API, extracting the archive, and then in clear text in the database is the username and password for the download client and the API key that you have to pay to get for the indexers. And you can also get the admin hash for the actual login appliance. So if their download client is also exposed on the internet, all of a sudden you can log into that and start, allegedly taking those paid credentials to access the new servers, the Equa and all the other ones that we were talking about. And it doesn't really stop there. In that DB, there's a couple other things here. If you link this through Plex in clear text in the database, you can get the Plex token, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff you can do with that. So
Yeah. So just to kind of continue with what JP was talking about, yeah, he's on the slide playing a DS with the V for Vendetta thing behind it. But yeah, API key theft is huge here. Again, I'm going to keep reiterating that we did not steal anything, but we did collect the names of the indexers that were in use for some, or for the instances that we surveyed and things, and doing some really kind of crappy math, determined there were like $10,000 plus in API keys that you could pull. There's a lot of duplicates and things like that, but if you yank those API keys, you can just use them straight up. And with a lot of indexers, there's not really crazy rate limits and things like that. In addition, pivoting is huge here. So once you've cracked that admin username and password, you get a hash for the actual admin to the Radar. You can very likely, with password reuse, log into Sonar instances. You can grab, if they have those exposed to the internet, so they don't even need to be vulnerable theoretically. In addition, because you have NZBGit or Qubit torrent creds stored in there as well, you can grab those creds, log into those providers or those applications and pull out, for example, Usenet provider creds and leverage them and things like that. And then nefarious activities, this is a thing that I was terribly tempted to do, but did not. Could theoretically delete full movie libraries and just put hackers on them or something like that. Same with TV shows and that sort of thing, Mr. Robot, whatever it might be. I've actually, scanning Shodan and things like that, seen this done with other self-hosted applications. People kind of, they don't break them, don't steal anything, but they do weird stuff like this in practice. So definitely a possibility here when you have full admin. I will hop over now, though, to the reporting timeline. So, of course, we disclosed this to the vendor or the lead developer. They had an email address we reached out to. In the end, I had to actually DM them on Discord, which I can't believe I had to do for a vuln report. But gave the initial report, sent a few follow-ups. Then during presentation creation or kind of compiling things here, we found that it was shadow patched in the code base and started getting propagated out to the other applications. We received a response via email. Then I kind of talked to them on Discord and things like that, and discussions are still ongoing. We've also submitted to MITRE they are severely underfunded, and this app, I don't think they care too much about people stealing movies, and so we haven't had a follow-up yet. The patch for the actual vulnerability is really cool. So instead of clearing all known networks like we showed in the code earlier, they only trust that X forwarded for header when it comes from these IP ranges that are shown up there. So really clean patch, and I thought it was going to be a huge rework. They were going to have to ditch DFLA as an option and things like that, but this is like perfect. Communication with them has been sparse. I will say if anybody's running a Servarr app at home, one of the messages he sent me was we are tracking the installation of these updates on instances, so they collect anonymous usage statistics. Go turn that off or patch it out. As for some takeaways and things like that, don't steal movies. No, I'm joking. Just use Usenet. Open source maintainers have it rough as well. I will say if you leverage an open source project heavily for your job or personal use, go look at the issues that they have in. It is miserable for these guys. Just because people will complain about having to have auth in front of their app, or the one movie isn't downloading. It has nothing to do with the developers. These guys have a hard time. And in addition, there's a lot more research to be done here. I'll say there's, like I said, thousands of self-hosted apps, a lot of them on the internet. And so tons of other vulnerabilities to look for and find and things like that, that, you know, could help protect people. I know I only have 5 minutes, but the other thing I will note, this is an attack surface that defenders don't look at. You have techie guys at your organization that are sysadmins that probably have this set up. But you know,
LastPass got
yeah, and LastPass got off of Plex. So it's, you know, something you can't really monitor, but you almost need to, because if some attacker gets on an internal network or something of a sysadmin, they could pivot to other machines and so on and so forth. You don't know what they're doing. But anyways, thank you everybody for listening. This is our kind of finale slide here. I know we don't have a ton of time, but if there are any questions, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll be available afterwards to chat on this stuff. So, awesome. All right.
Yeah.
What was the magnitude of number of instances you found? Tens of thousands, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 We didn't want to add like specific numbers, so it's just the percentages, but yes. And that's only the instances that are exposed to the internet, which obviously is the only attack surface we care about. But yeah, I think we use a couple different ways of figuring out what's actually out there, and the discrepancy between like Shodan and Census and FOFA. What's the other one?
Oh, FOP. Yeah.
Yeah, FOFA. Yeah. So tens of thousands.
A lot of like, yeah. There's a ton of stuff, but
I
okay.
think we're good.
Yeah.